Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I am your host. And today we're doing part two in a two-part series, responding to the fourth part in a fourth-part series of shorts that were produced by a gentleman by the name of Layne Kilpatrick. And we are going through them methodically to deconstruct and debunk the arguments that he presents against lab-grown cocoa and gene editing of cocoa trees. Now, irrespective of what you think about lab-grown cocoa or gene editing of cocoa trees, what we want to do is we want to take a look at the arguments that are being made and the evidence that is being presented to substantiate the arguments that are being made. And that's the focus of today's episodes. But before we get there, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, no matter where you might be watching, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you can go into the live chat on YouTube or the comments on LinkedIn or Facebook, and you can let me know what you think. If you've got some question about what it is that I've been saying, you have a comment, some observation that you've made, just let me know, and I will get that up on screen. And I will respond to it during the course of the episode. So please do that. I also want to point out that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. And here is the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. Right, I'm doing some work in the background. Here's the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. And what you can do is you can click on the join button, and the join button will takes you to this page, and you will have the opportunity to become a member. There's always been a free membership tier of The Chocolate Life since 2008 when I founded it, and if you do have the financial resources to support the work that I'm doing, then there are annual and monthly tiers where you can support the work that I do, beginning at as little as $5 per month. And with that bit of homework out of the way, let's go and take a look at this episode of this episode. So here is the post for today's episode, and I make a post for every single episode of Pod Save Chocolate. If you want to, up here, there is a link to the archives. You can go click on the archive link, and you'll find a list of the episodes all of the episodes of Pod Save Chocolate, as well as a link to the Chocolate Life Live archive. So that's handy if you're interested in figuring out the history of what it is that I've been doing. But let's jump in to today's episode. We have a lot to cover, and I'm hoping that we'll get there in the normal time of roughly an hour, because we're only going to be talking about a single episode today rather than 3 episodes today. I want to point out that the reason why I'm doing this is that 2 different members of The Chocolate Life sent me the links to Layne Kilpatrick's videos on this topic. So starting with part 1 of the lab-grown cacao series, lab-grown cocoa series, then somebody else sent me links to parts 1 and part 2. I found part 3, and part 4 was published shortly after I did the previous episode. Why am I doing this? On the top of line, right, reason why I'm doing this is that Layne Kilpatrick has a very large social media following. Large compared with me. It's not large in absolute Instagram terms or YouTube subscriber terms and things like that. But he has over 1 million followers on Instagram, and he's got over 500,000 followers on TikTok. And so there is a very large group of people who pay attention to him, and he gets a lot of engagement. There's lots of likes, and there's lots of comments, and I don't know how many shares there are, but there is an engaged audience that he has. Which means that what Kilpatrick can achieve, right, in terms of getting his message out there is very large. It's very great. It's huge compared with what it is that I can do here on The Chocolate Life. And that's an example of something called Brandolini's law. I mentioned it in the last episode. I'll bring it up again here. Brandolini's law says the amount of energy needed to refute misinformation is significantly greater than the effort required to spread it. And I'm going to zoom this up a little bit. I'll make it a little bit easier for you to follow if you're watching live. But that's one of the reasons why all of this stuff is in a post on the Chocolate Life that you can go read for yourself afterwards. You don't have to try to squint at the screen to see what it is that I'm saying or rely on my reading it back properly. It's here on the page, right? And so if this is Brandolini's law, right? So I am, there were 8 minutes of videos in total in the 4-part series. And I spent 90 minutes in a Pod Save Chocolate episode for the first 3 parts and spent more than an hour, maybe quite a bit more than an hour, just doing the research, the meta research, and then writing what you see on the post for the first one. And I spent a similar amount of time on this one. I have invested a lot more time in than 8 minutes in trying to refute what it is that Kilpatrick is saying. And so this is a great example of Brandolini's law. And it may be tilting at windmills. I mean, he has a much larger social media reach than I do. I have included @mentions on Instagram as well as on LinkedIn and said, hey, if you want to come on this channel and discuss with me, what your motivations are, what you're thinking, what you hope to achieve, I'm happy to do so. Right? I want to, while I'm not necessarily steel manning his straw man arguments or what I perceive to be straw man arguments, I do want to have the opportunity and have extended the opportunity to have him come on in person, right? With one stipulation, which is that he stream in real time to his YouTube channel without editing, right? And so that people who follow him on YouTube will be able to see the interaction and be able to understand what is going on, where he has objections to my objections, and for him to be able to show the research and steelman his own argument, right? So it's also true that the shorts format may be part of what it is that leads to what it is that I'm reacting to. If you only have a minute or 2 or at most 3 to be able to lay out a sort of nuanced description of a complex argument that's got lots of moving parts, shorts is not the most, in my opinion, I don't believe it's the most honest way to go about doing that. You're not going to be able to pack the nuance into the argument. The shorts format and the whole social media ecosystem says, let's be controversial. Let's set up an argument and let's appeal to sort of the emotions, not to the intellect. So that is an issue. So, and I do use some inflammatory language here. So Kilpatrick, sheep, I mean followers. I mean, is that necessary? No, it's not necessary, but I'm trying to, in some respects, invoke an emotional reaction in those people who do read this. So I'm going to do this, right? What Kilpatrick is doing here, in my opinion, and I write it here, spell it out here, is that I believe the people who are following Layne Kilpatrick will seize upon and hold tightly to facts that reinforce their suspicions, right? Which is a phenomenon called confirmation bias, and that they will overlook or outright dismiss anything that is counterfactual, even if it causes cognitive dissonance, which is holding 2 contradictory ideas in your mind at the same time. And how do you feel about that? And what do you do with the differences? How do you reconcile them in your mind? So this is really important to know, right? And am I tilting at windmills with a hat tip to Don Quixote and Miguel Cervantes? Maybe. I hope not. I hope that there will be people who will take what it is that I'm saying here to heart. And even if they don't use the ideas and techniques and the arguments that I present here, what they'll do is for this particular argument, they'll say, hey, how do I become a better consumer of content online? How do I be a little bit more skeptical, I suppose is the best way to describe it, so that I'm just not taking all of the assertions that people make at face value. And if nothing else, I mean, I will have succeeded in my goal here. Or I will feel that the work that I have spent is worth the time. And I think I spell this out in the next segment, which is it's important to compare what is called the principle of charity with what's called methodological skepticism. So the principle of charity advises you to approach another person's argument by interpreting it in the strongest reasonable way. This is generally called steel manning. You look at an argument and you go, I'm going to essentially give it the benefit of the doubt, right? And what I'm going to do is by giving it the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to assuming that the person who's constructed the argument, presenting the argument, is acting in good faith in presenting the argument, and I'm going to try to see from their side, what it is that they're talking about, right? Methodological skepticism, right, is a policy of systematic doubt, right, as a route to reliable knowledge. And so, and I consider myself generally to be a methodological skeptic, much as I consider myself to be a methodological naturalist. So I don't assume the supernatural is true. I want it to be demonstrated before I'm going to accept that it is true. And that's the same thing for methodological skepticism. It follows along. I'm not going to assume, prima facie, just because someone asserts it, something that something is true, right? I'm going to go look at the arguments and I'm going to go pull them apart, and I'm going to do my best to be able to fact check up or down what it is that they have to say before forming an opinion about what it is that they're doing. And that's what's in this blue box here, right? So let's start off really quickly, credential checking, right? And so this is not an ad hominem argument, right? This is part of my methodological skepticism. I want to know who the person is who is making the argument, right? And that's really important. Why should I trust, right, the person who is making these arguments? And this is sort of, is it a trust but verify? Not really. It's a don't trust until you have verified, right? Once an interlocutor, once somebody who's making this argument has generated that they are trustable, then you can lower your skepticism a bit, but that still doesn't mean you take everything that they have to say at face value. And by the way, I want everybody who watches this to do this with me, right? You should take everything that I say skeptically. You should do your own homework, research, meta research. Very few of us are doing actual research in the scientific, primary research in the scientific sense. What we're doing is we're looking up information that we can find on the internet using a variety of tools. And then what we're doing is we're coming to a conclusion based on what it is that they find. So the first thing we do is we find out that Kilpatrick, Layne, if I may, is a struck-off pharmacist in California. He tendered, right? He handed in his license as a pharmacist, his license to run a pharmacy as a result of not just allegations. Did he go to court? No, but the body that oversees such things in California said, "You be bad," right? Due to serious unprofessional conduct, which I repeat here. And in part one, I didn't actually, but I linked to the PDF file of the California Privacy Board, where you can go in and look at the case against Kilpatrick. So showing receipts is important. You don't have to trust me. You don't have to trust the way I respond to it. I provide the primary source, not in this, but in the previous post, right? But I did a little bit more meta research, right? And just so that everybody knows, is I have trained a couple of large language models on me. So I fed them a lot of my writing and a lot of my approach to things. So the LLM has an idea about how I approach things, right? And I use it to answer questions. And it's not just, who is Layne Layne Kilpatrick. I mean, the questions are more in depth than that. But what I did, right, is I found out that Kilpatrick's only formal medical education on record is in pharmacy, right? He has a BA, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy from the University of Utah, which he got in 1989, and identifies him as a clinical pharmacist. He has a background in pharmacy, right? And there's no publicly documented medical endocrinology or hormone-specific board certification or accreditation that would independently support him presenting himself as a hormone specialist. This is his @ handle. This is, you go to YouTube, you go to Instagram, you go to TikTok, he is @ hormone specialist, right? But he doesn't appear to have any medical training, certification, or accreditation that would say, I have passed a test and I know what I'm talking about. So it appears to be self-asserted, right? So it doesn't support him presenting himself as a hormone specialist in the sense that the term usually implies, right? As a licensed medical specialist in hormones. He does not appear to be a licensed medical specialist in hormones, despite the fact that he calls himself the hormone specialist, right? So does this mean that Kilpatrick is a scam? This is a pun, right? Lowercase s, can, right? So complementary alternative medicine, is he a scam artist? I don't know. I'm not saying that he is, just asking questions. Why should we trust him? He's struck off. He doesn't have any training, right? And so this doesn't mean I am going to distrust him. What it means is that I am going to raise the epistemic requirement for him to demonstrate that what he's saying is true. So it reduces my trust factor, my confidence in what it is that you're saying. That's what I'm saying. I'm just not ignoring him. I'm not ignoring him just because of this, but it does say, I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical, right? So the first 3 parts, I'm going to paraphrase my analysis of the first 3 parts of this series. So part 1, start with some easily fact-checkable points to establish to an audience who is primed to believe you and willing to, quote unquote, do their own research, which means use ChatGPT like Google, right? So these are people who are primed to believe who you are, right? And they're primed to accept what it is they're taking. And if they do want to fact check, the fact check will say, oh, yeah, right, these things are basically true. So that's step 1. Establish bona fides, establish credibility. And that's what I believe that happened in part 1 of this 4-part series, right? Oh, and by the way, if you go to the previous episode, which is linked to here, I do provide links to the first 3 shorts. All of the shorts are on YouTube. I provide links there. I don't recommend necessarily that you go and visit them and watch them, but I do provide the transcripts in my post. So you can follow the transcripts in my post. If you want to go watch it, you can watch the way he presents himself. All right. But I do provide the actual link to the full transcript on the page. There's a file you can download if you're interested, again, showing receipts. And then I break up the transcript and am responding to it point by point, right? So number 1, he establishes some credibility. Number 2, what you do is you take the credibility that you've established and you pivot to a new argument. So part 1 of the series was about lab-grown cocoa, and specifically the work that a company called California Cultured is doing, a business relationship that they have with Meiji, which is the largest confectionery company in Japan. So a long-term contract whereby Meiji will purchase alt.cocoa. So they will do California Cultured's cocoa, they'll buy California Cultured's cocoa alternative, and they will use it to make products, right? So those things are true, right? But what you do in part 2 is you take the credibility you established and go, And so what it is that Kilpatrick does is he takes that credibility about what he said about lab-grown cocoa, and he pivots to GMO. He pivots to a technology called CRISPR and gene editing of cacao trees. And so I've hooked you with one. I've proved that you can trust me, and bang, let's change the subject, right? But follow me. I'm going to change the subject. I'll establish a connection at some point, right? Part 3 is what he does. He did, in my opinion. And by the way, this is a playbook that you'll find across many conspiracy theories, right? Which is a pattern that I want you to recognize. Establish some credibility, right? Pivot to a new argument, lean into straw man arguments, which is part 3. And the leaning into the straw man argument is especially, right? And again, this is my characterization, by lacing them with an unhealthy dose of conspiracy theory to scare people. So what Kilpatrick, by setting up the Mars company, Mars Incorporated, as a boogeyman, what he's saying is big food tech is out to fool you and they think you're too dumb to notice the truth, right? Which I'm about to reveal to you at great personal risk, right? They don't want you to know about the evil plans to secretly turn every cacao tree on the planet into a deadly GMO. And in case you're wondering, what's this little character after GMO? It's a typographical character called an interrobang. And what the interrobang does is it visually mixes an exclamation point and a question mark, right? And it's one of my favorite modern new sort of punctuation typographic conventions. I love the interrobang, right? So in step 4, and this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of this episode, I'm going to say that Kilpatrick will build on the foundation of his previous 3 shorts. He's going to try to scare the living daylights out of his followers with the specter of globalist collusion. There is a global cabal of which Mars Incorporated is just one actor, right? And you should be scared of something, right? He will, but he doesn't tell you what you should be scared of. He only hints. There's no specific harm that he's talking about. He just mentions harm generically that you should be worried about. And it's not true, is it GMOs, gene edited trees, directly, indirectly, what is it that he's talking about, right? Although he does go into this idea that, you know, and I'll go into it a little bit I will go into it in great detail further on, is that Mars is doing something deliberately to further oppress cocoa farmers is probably the best way to describe it. No, I don't know that it's the best way to describe it. It's the way I'm going to describe it, right? So he's going to build on the foundation of his previous shorts. He's going to confidently propose a solution. My solution is, right? And in this particular case, it's a solution that might be theoretically might be possible, but it may not be practically achievable. And in some parts of the world, there's already legislation against his solution, but he doesn't share any of those facts with you. It's like, I have a solution to the problem, and hand wave away any of the background. Again, the shorts format, right, doesn't lend itself to this kind of nuance. It's all about engaging emotionally, or emotionally charging up the people who are watching what is you're doing, people who might not be skeptical, people for whom you've already demonstrated your credibility, right? In previous episodes, not only of this series, but in general, right? You're also going to claim that the boogeyman, well, in this particular, also claiming the boogeyman Kilpatrick, has set up to take the fall, already knows the solution. Oh my gosh, right? In this particular case, Mars Incorporated, they already know what the answer is, and they're purposefully hiding it for everyone, right? Is that true or not? Anyway, here is the link to the episode right here. Lab Made Cocoa. He's, again, right? This is a series he's now talking about gene edited cacao trees, not lab grown cocoa. They're different things, right? But he's kept the title of the series, even though he's no longer talking about it. Anyway, so let's go here. Right. So I just want to, just from a formatting note, if you see something in this format here, so it's blue with this brown line on the left of it, this is text verbatim from the transcript. This note down here in yellow is I did not edit any of the transcript except to fix spelling and to remove the timestamps, right? Because they weren't relevant in this particular case. So I'm going to present all of my responses in different styles and colors. So this is from the transcript up here. So if you see it in this format, it's from the transcript. If you see it in any other format, like these two here, it's my response. So I just wanted to let you know. And in case you are interested, this is the transcript, right? You can download the transcript and you can take a look at it and you can decide, did I cut anything out so that I can unfairly misrepresent it? Here's a receipt, right? I just want to let you know, you can go do this. And by the way, there are a wide number of tools that are there that you can go and you can give the tool the URL of the YouTube video. And if a closed caption has been automatically generated, so this is speech to text, what you'll do is you can grab the text with the timestamps. And that's what I did. So I'm not hacking a server. I'm not doing anything illegal. I mean, I could just go to the transcript and grab it, but it turns out programmatically, it's a whole lot easier than to go and do it manually. So that's what I do. And you can do this too, right? All right. But before I dive down through Kilpatrick's arguments, what I want to really, really, really emphasize here, right, is that as you watch this short, if you're going to do that, as you watch the short, right, you need to understand that his central thesis makes zero economic sense. Here is a gentleman who knows nothing about the economics at the farm level or through the entire value chain, from the farm to the factory to the consumer. This is a man who fundamentally doesn't know or doesn't care to share his knowledge about what is actually going on. What are the economics, right? So there are fundamental differences, right? And this is a key point that we'll go through. There are fundamental differences between annual seed crops like corn and soy and perennial tree crops, right? These are differences, the fundamental differences that don't appear anywhere in Kilpatrick's arguments. Now, right, I generally try not to assert motivation, right? I'm going to assume, never ascribe to malice that which can be supported by just ignorance, just by a lack of knowledge. I don't know that he's deliberately doing this or he just doesn't know, right? So I'm not it's one way or the other. I'm not saying he's doing this because these are inconvenient truths. The difference between seed crops and tree crops is an inconvenient truth, right? But is he hiding them because it's an inconvenient truth or just because he doesn't know about them, right? Either way, right? The entire argument that he is going to make is a straw man, right? And I'm going to explain to you why over the next several paragraphs here, and I'm not going to refer to them while we're doing this, but you can go and take a look at them. The value of an annual seed crop, right, which has been gene edited, for which you hold a patent, or which a company holds a patent, is that the seed needs to be replanted every year. The farmer needs to buy seeds, gene-edited, patented seeds from you every year. So if we're talking about something, perhaps the most visible example is Roundup Ready. So you want a crop which is going to withstand glyphosate. You buy Roundup Ready seeds, and there is something added into the genetics that when you apply the activator, the glyphosate, stuff happens, right? And so that's one way that the genetics of a plant can be edited, right? Right. Okay. All right. So I have to buy the seeds every year. So what? It turns out that gene-edited seeds can command a premium of 2 to 3 times or more what a conventional, non-gene edited seed might cost, right? And so, so any theft or any misappropriation, right? Oh, I keep some of the Roundup Ready seed, and so so that I don't have to buy as much of it next year. That's what I'm referring to as theft, whether that theft is intentional or accidental, right? If it's accidental, I don't know that it's theft, right? In the common law terms, right? But what that does is it reduces the income to the patent holder, right? And it turns out there are somewhere between 32 and 35 million hectares of just soy planted in the United States, right? And if we think that just the premium for gene edited soy, Roundup Ready soy is just $100 per hectare, that's tens of billions of dollars, right? Which are on the table every year. So billions are at stake every year just for soy, just in the United States. And that's the value of the patent to the patent holder. It is a lot of money, right? Now, cacao is a tree crop, right? It can take between 1.5 to 3 years, depending upon the genetics, for the tree to just start becoming productive, to grow pods, which can be harvested, that you can then ferment, dry, and sell on, right? And it takes somewhere between 3 and 5 years, again, depending upon the genetics and other factors, agricultural practices, where you're located, all kinds of things factor into that. But it can take between 3 and 5 years for a tree to be productive. Trees also produce for decades, so that once somebody has purchased a gene-edited cacao tree, they don't need to buy another one for a long time, right? Right? And they tend to be productive for at least 20 to 30 years. So producing a new cacao tree from tree seedling, right, from seed or by grafting, takes much more effort than planting corn or soy. In part, this is because the planting doesn't happen in situ. And what I mean by not happening in situ is that when the farmer plants a corn kernel, a corn seed, they do it directly into the ground, and the plant grows, or the corn stalk grows from where that seed is in the ground. With cacao, I grow the seedlings in a nursery, and then I have to transplant them. So I'm not doing them in situ. I'm not growing the tree where the tree is going to eventually grow and produce. I'm not propagating the seedling, right, where the tree is going to grow and produce. And it doesn't matter if you plant the seed. It doesn't matter if you do the grafting. The similar is kind of true. Rootstock is propagated in the nursery, and the scion, the little bit, the bar in some cases, depending where you are, bara, that gets grafted, the scion, is gathered from mother trees, right? The what you're going to graft, the material you're going to graft is gathered from trees that are known to possess the characteristics that you want, and you graft that onto the rootstock. The newly grafted pair remains in the nursery until confirmation that graft is successful. Grafting is not 100% successful, right? And so you need to make sure that the graft will take and the tree will be healthy before you transplant it, right? And that transplanting happens one at a time, by hand, in a hole that is dug for every individual tree. Right? And that's really, really different. If I have what's called a seed driller, very, very common, I can plant hundreds of thousands of seeds in a day, thousands of seeds in an hour. I mean, it doesn't match, right, between what I can do planting a seed, which I need to plant every year, and planting a cacao tree, which becomes productive once it becomes productive for decades. The economics don't work. What is the economic value of the tree to a company like Mars, right? They don't own the trees, right? How much can they sell the seedling for? $1, $5, $10, right? What is the premium for doing their gene-edited tree as opposed to a conventional tree? We don't understand. The entire premise that Layne is basing his argument, or Kilpatrick is basing his argument for in this episode, is based on this fundamental understanding, right? It is possible to clone genetic material in a laboratory using a process called somatic embryogenesis. Excuse me, my earpiece fell out. I've been to the lab at Penn State University at the research center, the Cacao Research Center, which is run by Mark Giltonen and Ciela Maximova, where I was first introduced to the concept back in 2015. I mean, the technology is available, but it's really expensive. The lab needed to do this is really expensive. And the lab really needs to be close to where you're going to grow the trees. So I could take some germplasm, grow it in a lab, right? And then I could transplant the seedlings into the farm. But I would want that farm to be in the country where I'm going to do the transplanting. I'm not going to have a somatic embryogenesis factory in the United States where I might hold the patent on that, and then ship the materials to another country, in part because there might be an embargo on importing live genetic material that hasn't been quarantined. I mean, it's complicated. It's not as simple as you might think. So the investment in the facility to do the somatic embryogenesis is millions at least. And once you sell all the trees, you don't need the facility for what, another 20 years? I mean, how does that all work? I'm just saying, maybe, I do cocoa 1 year and then I'll do palm another. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It starts to fall apart, right? So while growing the seedlings is very highly scalable, right, the facilities and the planting labor, not so much, right? As I say, one farmer riding a seed drill can plant up to 100 hectares of corn or soy in a day. That's millions of seeds. The planted seeds generate a return within months, right? It takes months and hundreds of hours of laborers to plant even a single hectare of new cacao trees from either seeds or grafts, right? The planted tree won't start generating an ROI for years. If there is an ROI to be generated, it is plants that provide overstory, that provide shade and other things like plantains, right, that are planted aside the cacao trees. Those are going to be what provides the return while the farmer is waiting for the cacao tree to become productive, right? The farmer doesn't need to replant for 2 to 4 decades, if ever, right? So there's a lot of examples of farms where the trees are much older than 20 to 30 years, right? So patent holders are not selling billions of seeds every year. That fundamental difference, right? When you take it, I want you to just hold it in your brain, right? As I go through the rest of what it is that Kilpatrick is presenting as both the problem and his solution, right? And here's a question that I do want to mention with this is when you ask, then you have to ask yourself, why would a company like Mars want to own cacao farms in the first place? This will become, right, obvious. It may be out of place here, a non sequitur, right? But it is central to the thesis, right? It's the other part of the argument that Kilpatrick is making, right? So I'm going to respond to it before we go into it because I want to just, again, put this into your mind. So this is part of the methodological skepticism, right, that I am using to examine Kilpatrick's arguments. If there's anything that we've learned about the cacao industry, the chocolate industry, over at least the last 20 years since the enactment or the ratification of the Harkin-Engel Protocol here in the U.S., is that what they want to do is they want to evade all responsibility for illegal child labor. They want to evade all responsibility for the environmental destruction that has been responsible, that they have perpetuated, they've caused and perpetuated as a result of their sourcing practices, right? They don't want any of the risks associated with owning farms on their balance sheets. If they owned 1 million hectares of cacao land across the world, that would show up in their financial statements. And they don't want that. So they just don't want that because it turns out that they're able to buy cocoa at a lower price if they don't own the land than if they had to own the land, right? So that's another aspect of this, that's the economic argument that Kilpatrick is going to make, right? So Kilpatrick asserts without evidence that the only logical, my words, not his, right, remedy that a company like Mars might seek for patent infringement would be for the farmer to hand over title to their farm with the trees to Mars, right? And what? I mean, this is something that just really crazes me. So the farmer hands over their land. Oh, that's interesting. I need to quit music. The farmer needs to hand over their land to Mars and what? Then work the land to pay off their debt because they don't have enough resources to win in a lawsuit, to defend a lawsuit. So they're just going to hand over the land and agree to work the land for. That's indentured servitude, in my opinion, and would constitute an illegal labor relationship under ILO as we currently understand it. But that's again a complete misunderstanding, right? If Mars assumes ownership of the farm, what does the farmer do, right? And it's like is I just want to let you know, right, that I just looking at this argument and it fell apart very quickly. And another thing is that assumes that the farmer actually has clear title to the land and can hand it over to Mars. Right? So this notion of ownership, right, and who owns clear title is a huge problem in large parts of the cocoa growing world, right? And I want you to keep all of that stuff in mind, right, before I actually start addressing arguments, Kilpatrick's arguments point by point. But before I do, this is the 25th anniversary of my going online and starting my career as a professional chocolate critic, as a consultant, as an educator. And between now and the end of June, there's now a lifetime membership that provides really, really valuable, I think, benefits to lifetime members. You can learn more about the lifetime membership, what it costs, what lifetime membership is, what it costs by clicking on this link here, right? And your support really does make it possible for me to continue this kind of in-depth analysis, which I've done for Kilpatrick, I did with the Chocolate Scorecard, I've done with Tony's Chocolonely, I've done with UK Cocoa Coalition, Together Cocoa. I mean, I'm one of the few people in the world who does this, and I hope you appreciate that, and I hope you'll support at any level, if not a lifetime member, then as a monthly or an annual member. So you can learn more about that here. Anyway, let's jump into part 4. Again, right? If you go and take a look, anything that's in this blue with this brown here, that is from the transcript, and it's a quote. All right, so we have, Jin Kim from California. Hey, Jin, thanks for chiming in. Nowadays, it's never ascribed to malice, that which can be ascribed to clickbait engagement. Absolutely, I agree with there. I would agree with that. Another way of rephrasing this: never ascribe to malice that which can be attributed to, or never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity or ignorance or many other things. But yeah, but the title, Lab Grown Cocoa, that's not very much a clickbaity title. But the arguments we make really are. Congrats on 25. Thank you very much. It's been, if I were to get to another 25, I would be in my mid 90s. Maybe, but looking forward to support to get it through the next decade, at least. I got a project which I'm starting, which I will talk about. And just before I go on, one of the things that I will be doing for the month of June and going forward is I will be doing a looking backward, looking forward kind of thing. So I've got a couple of things that I've done over the last 2 or 3 years here on Pod Safe Chocolate and the Chocolate Life Live. I'm going to go revisit them and say, how did I do? And then what do I think is going to be happening in the future? So there's going to be this retrospective, which is going on between now actually and the end of 2026, although I'm starting it I'm starting it in the month of June. It turns out that June 2nd happens to be the first time that the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine took a snapshot of chocophile.com. Coincidentally, I didn't plan it that way. So anyway, I'm going to be, the next, at least the entire month of June, which is also my birthday. My birthday takes place in June, will be this focus, this retrospective and forward-looking thing. Anyway, so with all that out of the way, so Again, anything that's in this blue with the brown bar on the left. So, all right, if this last installment of this series on lab-grown cocoa doesn't light your hair on fire, you're using PFAS, flame retardant for hair product. So this is obviously an emotional appeal, right? It's like you're using PFAS, flame retardant for hair product is his way of saying you be stupid without saying you be stupid. It's only an emotional appeal. What's interesting about it, right, is that PFAS, which I don't know how many his followers know they are, other than they are forever chemicals and bad, is that per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, right? That's the technical term for them. Polyfluoroalkyl substances are actually used in some hair care products, right? They're used not as flame retardants, but to provide texture and provide water and stain resistance. So I don't know. It's a cell phone of one form or another, right? The framing is purposely inflammatory, pun intended, flame retardant, right? Inflammatory, appealing to emotion rather than reason. And this is a pattern that's followed throughout the rest of this short, right? Now, again, I try to bring in some ideas about logical fallacies that you might think about. Misdirection. Note that Kilpatrick is no longer talking about lab-grown in bioreactors cocoa. That was part one, right? He's talking about gene-edited trees, right? Those are not the same thing, but he's counting on his readers not to notice the switch. We were talking about lab-grown in bioreactors, cell culturing, right? Now we're talking about something completely different, right? The next thing he says is when cacao genes edited by Mars Candy Company drift in pollen onto a neighboring cocoa farm in Ghana and fertilize a farmer's trees, ... Okay, I'm going to continue it right down here. So as I pointed out in the previous episode, windborne pollen provides negligible pollinating effect in cacao. The vast majority of it is with the pollination is done by small insects, midges. But there's something more natural, sort of Rousseauian kind of illusion, which is where you talk about pollen, which is drifting on the wind, right? So it's a deliberate framing, right, which is designed to sort of lull the suspicions of the listeners. And I got a nitpick, right? It's not the Mars Candy Company, right? It's Mars Incorporated, right? Founded in 1911. They manufacture and sell confectionery. A lot of stuff that they make, gum, for example, doesn't have any chocolate in it. But they also make snack foods, pet foods, supplies. Should be pet foods and supplies for pets, and veterinary services, in addition to supplements. Cocovia is one of them. Among other items, they also conduct and invest in research that leads to the introduction of new products. So this is a link to the Wikipedia article. Yep, it's a link to the Wikipedia article. You can find out more about Mars Incorporated, not the Mars Candy Company. Does this matter? It's just really about fact checking and representation. I think it's an indicator of his not caring about whether or not what he's saying is factually true. My opinion, don't know, right? But it is a conclusion I have reached by watching these 4 episodes, which are the only 4 episodes of his I've ever watched. So when cacao genes edited by Mars Candy Company drift in pollen, right, onto a neighboring cocoa farm and fertilize a farmer's tree, who owns the resulting seeds? Well, the court says Mars owns the seeds. Mars does, right? And here's where I'm going to do a fact check, right? The law is clear in the United States. U.S. patents are de facto only enforceable in the United States unless there's some law that says that they're more broadly. So if there is a treaty, for example. So U.S. patents on genetically modified seeds are enforceable in Canada, for example, right? Is there a similar treaty between the United States and Ghana? I haven't found one, right, that says that Mars can go and enforce their patents where? And this is an issue. Are they enforcing the patents in a court in Ghana, or are they forcing the farmer to come to the United States? Where's the jurisdiction? It's not clear, right? Right. So there is some nuance to this fact in some areas of IP law, and one of these areas is agricultural patents, right? This is especially true if the stolen patented product, so the product is not a tree, if that's what the gene, if cocoa beans from a gene edited tree make it back into the States, then there would be a clear um, infraction against the patent, right? But it's not clear what would happen if the cocoa grown in Ghana made its way to France or some country which is not a signatory, right, to a patent. For Mars to be able to enforce its patent globally, it would need to have a patent in place every in every place where its cocoa would be grown, right? So not clear what's going on, right? So again, I said I use LLMs. I use Gemini and Claude and ChatGPT. All three of them are trained on me. So there's this whole corpus of documents, whole corpus of conversations, a document about voice, what it is that I'm looking for and how to write about it, which has been a part of my training, my LLMs. And then I'm careful about the questions that I ask. And so with this respect to patents, I copied and pasted the entire response unedited from my fact check skill on patents related to gene editing in agriculture. And if you want to read it, you can download the PDF, and you'll see that there are some places where it turns out that Kilpatrick is making claims that are supported by evidence, right? And this is part of the danger of what is going on, is because there are elements of truth, right? In many of there are factual elements which are true in much of what it is that Kilpatrick claims. And that only serves for people who are not interested in the nuance to go, but this is true. Okay, but you need to read the paragraph before and read the paragraph after. You need to understand the context in which it is said. And that's not necessarily something that many people will do. What they'll do is they'll just latch on to the sentence that confirms their suspicions. They'll latch on to the sentence that confirms their bias, confirmation bias. But hey, right? I'm not trying to get you to agree. Well, I am trying to get you to agree. I'm trying to get you to agree with what it is that I'm talking about, but I'm showing you, right, the conversation, parts of the conversation that I had with an LLM, right? And you with my fact check skill, right? I'm not going to share my fact check skill. I spent, close to 2 years developing it. So I just want to let you know. All right. So we've got this question: who owns the resulting seedlings? Well, it's not just the seedlings, it's the tree and the cacao. So again, another nitpick, right? Right. So not only does a native cocoa farmer get control of his gene pool stolen from him, he could eventually lose ownership of his entire inventory. And this is where the conspiracy theory starts to go off the rails, in my opinion. He's gone from Mars owns the seedlings, may or may not be true, to the native cocoa farmer loses control of the gene pool, loses control of his trees, and could eventually lose ownership of his entire tree inventory, by which we mean the trees and presumably the land on which the trees are grown. That's quite a leap, and he hasn't justified it. He's just asserted it. And as we know from Hitchens' razor, right, anything which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. I don't need to consider this to be true, right, until he comes and actually, he or anyone else wants to say, here's some evidence to demonstrate the plausibility, the likelihood, the probability that this is going to happen. None of it, right? So the farmer could lose inventory. So could is doing a whole lot of heavy lifting here. Is it plausible? I don't think so. Is it probable? No, right? This is important because the rest of the script of this episode is going to propose that the farmer being forced to hand over their farm and trees is an inevitable consequence, right? But what he says, I, Layne Patrick, who is not a lawyer, not a geneticist, nor an expert on cacao, I have the solution, right? Right. So any gene added Mars makes to cacao, again, this is a literal transcript from what is it he said. So it's I didn't change it. You can go follow along what he says in the video and you'll see that's what the transcript is. Any gene added by Mars that Mars makes to cacao using licensed CRISPR technology becomes Mars intellectual property. That's true if it is patented. It's not true if it's not patented, and patents are geographically limited in scope, right? So Mars could edit a gene and decide to throw it into the public domain. It doesn't automatically become their property, right? That Mars has to patent it, right? So this is a tautology, right? Anything Mars adds, it's trivially true. It's trivially true under U.S. law, with the assumption that Mars has applied for a patent for it. And then he says, and Mars isn't alone. There are more than 1,000 CRISPR patents right now at the U.S. Patent Office that have agricultural application, right? So I did a little digging. There isn't a single authoritative real-time number for how many CRISPR patents there are at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office with agricultural applications, right? And no primary source gives a precise count, right? So he can say that there are more than 1,000, okay, right? It is plausible that hundreds to low thousands of U.S. patents and published applications involve CRISPR that have some agricultural relevance. So this is in green here, right? Because it turns out if you do some fact checking, it lacks some nuance, right? Which I think is important, but it's not wrong in any sense, right? Then he says the Supreme Courts of both Canada and the U.S. have ruled that ownership of the physical plant is no defense of a patent claim. The patent on the gene trumps the farmer's property rights to the plant on his own land that he owns. Right? And this is true for U.S. patents in the U.S. and Canada. However, the assertion that a U.S. patent necessarily trumps a farmer's property rights is not settled law when the claimed infringement happens in another country. And some of that is actually covered in the legal fact check. You can go and read what it has to say. All right. Right. And then he goes on, now apply that. All right. So that. So by that, he means in context that the patent on the gene trumps the farmer's property rights to the plant. All right. So this is what we're referring to. Now apply that to West Africa. Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana have an estimated 2 million smallholder cocoa farmers. The average farmer earns less than $2.15 a day. Mars, on the other hand, is privately held with about 55 billion in annual sales. Right. Just from, I mean, even though it doesn't really solve the problem, right? You'd want to do annual sales versus annual income. So we'd need to multiply this 2 by 365. It doesn't make any tangible difference, right? But by choosing 250 in a day and 55 billion a year, he's just amplifying the difference. It adds another 1.3 orders of magnitude difference. 300, it adds a discrepancy in that way. But it turns out this is true, right? The average farmer, I mean, learns about 215 a day. It depends on, you're talking about Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon. But, you know, if we were to do this as an average across West Africa, it's in the ballpark, right? Mars, on the other hand, is privately held with about 55 billion in annual sales. And again, if somebody were to fact check how much does the average cocoa farmer make in a day and how much does Mars make in a year? Oh, he's not lying here, right? It's generally true, right? But this is a bit of misdirection, right? Kilpatrick is setting up Mars as a heartless bully playing into his audience's distrust of globalism, but only of Mars, right? He's only criticizing Mars here. He doesn't have anything to say here. Again, it's the shorts, right? But when we talk about Tesla or SpaceX or Amazon, right, we can't stop trusting them, can we? This is just Mars, right? Politics. Anyway, so it says here, most cacao varieties can't successfully fertilize themselves. Some plants can. So the pollination system that makes the chocolate industry possible is the same system that has no biological defense against engineered pollen from a neighbor's plantation. All right. So this is a misdirection, right? In the guise of a false dichotomy, where only two options are presented when there might be more. Kilpatrick is relying on the fact that the average reader has zero knowledge of how cacao pollinates. This is something that he retreats to on more than one occasion. But the statement, the pollination system that makes the chocolate industry possible is the same system that has no biological defense against engineered pollen from a neighbor's plantation, is a tautology for a very simple reason. Cocoa is not alone in this, right? No naturally evolved system of pollination has developed a biological defense against engineered pollen. And why should we expect cacao to be any different, right? We shouldn't. So he's holding up this boogeyman, he's holding up this specter, right? That cacao is somehow different. Well, it is. I mean, cacao is different. There's a lot of difference between cacao and corn and soy, right? But this notion about pollination and a defense against gene editing is like trivially true, because no plant which has evolved on the planet, right, has evolved a natural defense to genetically engineered anything. So the question I have for Kilpatrick here is, if what you say is true, the pollination system, right? So what you say is true, most cacao varieties cannot successfully fertilize themselves. Some can, right? Some plants, I'm assuming that he's talking about cacao varieties here. Some plants can successfully fertilize themselves. There's just rabbit hole after rabbit hole after rabbit hole down here, a rabbit trail after here. But if what you say is true, right, that cacao trees can't successfully fertilize them themselves, how did cacao trees pollinate, spread, and evolve in the wild before human intervention? If the cacao trees can't fertilize themselves, why do we find remnants of cacao all over, right, the South America, particularly in the upper Amazon River basin, spreading from modern day Ecuador and Peru all the way into the eastern Amazon in Pará state? How did that happen if the trees can't fertilize themselves, or if most trees can't fertilize themselves? Riddle me that one, Batman. All right, so if that's a gene-edited Mars plantation, all right, so gene-edited Mars plantation, well, people are going to go, a gene-edited Mars plantation, is this a plantation that Mars owned? That's one interpretation of this. Or is it a plantation in which there's Mars gene-edited cacao growing? That's another interpretation, right? And Mars choose to sue for patent infringement, right? Even if a Ghanaian farmer wins in court, the cost of fighting is more than he'll earn in a lifetime. Again, this first notion, red herring, gene-edited plantation, he's not, or gene-edited Mars plantation, we're not entirely clear what it is that he means like that. But this framing further sets Mars up as an evil bully, plotting to take my evil plan, plotting to take unfair advantage of low-income farmers for the purposes of taking their property. To which I will say, Mr. Kilpatrick, do you have any evidence of that? And we should say that which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. This is where he shifts from being a lawyer or making legal claims to being an expert in gene editing. So here's what I think the fix should be. Here's what he said. This is what the fix should be. He's prefacing, I think, right? If a company patents a gene edit, require it to be incapable of spreading by natural pollination. Build the fence into the seed or don't plant it. Well, so number one here, he's conflating corn and soy seeds with cacao trees and the way cacao trees propagate and are fertilized, right? And natural pollination is another red herring here. This sounds like a good idea to someone who knows nothing about how pollinating happens. But Layne, please, Mr. Kilpatrick, explain to me what unnatural pollination is. Again, it's this sort of appeal to Rousseau. All things natural are better than all things which are not natural, right? And look around. I mean, anything which is been produced by humans is natural in one sense, because humans are natural things, right? The things we create are natural things, right? So we need to know what natural means and what unnatural means, and he's just relying on his listeners, his followers, to construe the word natural in a particular kind of way. It's also a misdirection. Planting from seed is only one way to propagate cacao trees, right? And then finally, right, I want to get into this. All right, so green, right? What Kilpatrick is likely referring to here is GERTs, right, or genetic use restriction technologies, right? They exist. GERTs are a real thing, right? And I will talk about them a little bit more, and I will give you the link to it. So across 8 years of development, I can't find a single published statement about how Mars plans to keep their genetic modification from spreading to the next generation of cacao seedlings anywhere. So what he's just done is he's said, I think this is what you should do, and I don't see any evidence that these people have done what I think that they should do. And well, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I mean, we need to be very, very, just because you didn't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? It just hasn't been made publicly available, right? But now again, he's setting up Mars as a boogeyman, right? You can't find a single published statement about how Mars plans to use GERTs, so genetic use restriction technologies, to keep what he says is a bad thing. He hasn't explained what's bad about it, right? What can happen if the pollen spreads, right? Apart from an intellectual property dispute, what's going to happen to? He hasn't explained what the harm is in any concrete way, right? So I'm in a little, I have to think about that, right? Given how unreliable his understanding of cacao is in other areas, I'm not giving Kilpatrick the benefit of the doubt here. I have no idea, and he does not tell us how deep his research into the topic was. He may be right, but just because you couldn't found it doesn't mean it doesn't exist, right? And again, I went to my LLMs and I said, hey, go fact check his claim. Go fact check Kilpatrick's claim that he makes about GERTs. I think if a company gene edits a plant and across 8, go fact check those claims, right? And what the LLM came back with is here. You want to download it, you can read the entire thing. If it says at some point there's a likelihood that this is true, I left it in. I didn't edit it, right? So it's there, right? You can take from it what you will, right? But I did include some meta research. I'm not doing the research, right? I use the LLM to go and find the research. And by the way, I'm careful to claim, show your sources, make sure that the links are shown. So if you want to, right, if you go look at this, you'll find that there are links to papers and institutions which talk about this. I'm not pulling this out of my butt when I say these things, all right? And God forbid something goes wrong. Why bring God into this, right? Right, and there's a very clear reason to make this claim in here at this point, because it's a rhetorical framing device that will appeal to his audience, right? That's it. I mean, this is here by doing this, God forbid something. What? Something what? What are you claiming might go wrong? What might go wrong? Right? And here he's leaning into the public distrust, right, his followers have of GMOs, right? And as I say here, he has yet to actually substantiate any actual harm that might occur. He's just appealing to his followers' general distrust of science. GMO, bad. And I mean, it could be a goat or a sheep, but it is a dog whistle, right? Both the bringing up God, all right, here, and something goes wrong are dog whistles to his audience, right? So the technology exists to contain it. These are GERTs. The technology, does it exist to contain it? I mean, is he overstating anything here? Yes, GERTs are real, right? But the Berkeley Mars team has not used any of it. Right? How does he know that? How does he know that the Berkeley Mars team have not used any of it, right? So in general, right? Gene use restriction technologies do exist. Variety-specific and trait-specific GERTs have been explicitly developed to make second-generation seeds non-viable, right? VGERTs, or to restrict the function of a trait unless a chemical activator is applied, like TGERT. So there's like Roundup Ready seeds and Roundup, right? The Roundup Ready seed is there, and the gene is activated when you apply the chemical to it, right? As opposed to the seed having this naturally built in, right? But again, how can Kilpatrick know conclusively that Mars has not been investigating GERTs? I don't think he can, but he's saying to his followers, just trust me, bro, right? I am the expert on all of these things, and you can trust me. Do some fact checking on some things, and you'll find out that I'm not wrong in many, many things, right? But what really, I've thought about, it's just like, I go on walks in the morning and in the evening, and sometimes I'll just put my noise canceling headphones on and not have anything playing in them, and I'll just start asking my question: what are the implications of second generation seeds being non-viable? So when I talk about cacao trees and I talk about second generation seeds, so if I'm planting a seed, so I've got farmer A, and the pollen stays on my farm and it pollinates a tree, which is also on my farm. Maybe that's not genetically edited, but it's something else. And I take a pod and I try to grow the seeds. Will that seed be viable or not? And what does that mean, right? My brain goes, right? It's just, is it assuming that what Mars wants to do is make sure that no farmer anywhere can plant from? Did you want to make sure that it doesn't happen? Or if it does float into some other farm, that it doesn't happen? Why? For what reason? How does this benefit Mars, right? Because I don't understand what the harm is and what the remedy might be. And so if you're gonna say I have been harmed and you want to get damages or you want thing happens, you got to say what the remedy is, and then you have to calculate what if a farmer is earning 365, under $1,000 a year for their farm, what's the remedy for that? You can it just, that hasn't been thought through. Right. And it's one of the reasons why. So while it is true in principle, right, you can go and take a look at this GERT fact check up here. While it is true in principle that it is possible to engineer traits to sharply reduce their ability to spread via pollen or by seed, and CRISPR does make it easier to do so without transgenes. Oh no, transgenes. Are we actually turning these trees trans? Is there a gender associated with the trees that they're confused about? It's not what this. Transgenics is taking a gene from another plant or animal and inserting it into another plant. So this is what transgenics or transgenes are. All right. But at one level, I'm surprised he didn't actually use the word transgenics here to stoke fear of trans cacao trees in his followers. Anyway, so however, this is important. The notion of an absolute fence that prevents the spread is entirely not supported by current research. At best, it is possible to design reduced risk systems, and reduced risk are not mathematically zero risk systems, especially for a long-lived cross-pollinating perennial like cacao. Right. So number one, right, Kilpatrick says I have the solution. This is what they should do. Right. When the research says, hold on, buddy, it's not a complete solution. It might sharply reduce, right, but it's not going to reduce it to zero. Right. So the impenetrable fence that Kilpatrick proposes could be engineered into a cacao seed using CRISPR as the solution. Right. Right. However, it probably doesn't exist. Right. Yet it may exist in the future. It doesn't exist today. Right. No current literature. Right. And I didn't review all the literature, but this is a summary of the fact check. right? No current literature describes a deployed, field-tested, fully self-containing CRISPR-edited tree crop that guarantees zero risk of pollen-mediated gene transfer. And so his solution right now doesn't work, right? So make of that what you will. Furthermore, and this is another aspect of this, many GERT-style technologies have never reached commercial deployment. In part, why doesn't Mars talk about it? Maybe one reason is that there's an effective de facto moratorium on what are called terminator seeds, and this notion of making a second generation seeds non-viable. It's called a terminator, right? The effective de facto moratorium on terminator seeds under the Convention on Biological Diversity. Right? So maybe one reason it's not in the field, and maybe one reason Mars doesn't talk about it, is because there's a moratorium on it in the global community. Right? And I link to a story about this, which is published on the Oakland Institute. That link, by the way, appears in this fact check. Right? So I just picked one out and said, oh, this is, after reading a couple, I said, this is the broadest discussion of it that you can do. Now, not only is there an effective de facto moratorium on terminator seeds, but several countries, including India, which is not a major cocoa producer, but Brazil, which is a major cocoa producer, right, have passed laws explicitly prohibiting gene use restriction technologies in crops in the field. Right? So that could be another reason why Mars hasn't been publicly talking about it, because their evil secret plan to take over the world, right, can't happen because there's a law against it in a couple of the countries already. So then he follows it up with this really weird analogy. Look, a rancher can't let his bull get through the fence and breed his neighbor's herd. In every other industry, the owner of the hazardous thing pays the cost of keeping it contained. The polluter pays. I'm sorry. The polluter pays, Kilpatrick? The polluter pays? Let me do this. Hey, Layne, the polluter pays? In what universe do you live in? Certainly not the United States. In what universe do you live in where the polluter pays, right? The current U.S. administration is doing everything it can to gut every government agency's authorities to hold polluters accountable, let alone assess fines and recover them. The assertion the polluter pays is fallacious on its face, right? Right? And I got to believe that a lot of his politically conservative, conspiracy-minded followers are going, yeah, this is good. The polluter pays, when it's, it can't be true, right? So that's a red herring. Another red herring that we have to talk about, right, when we talk about these things, is the bull analogy. I don't know why I got hurt here. Anyway, the bull analogy it brings up assumes the bull is an agent of the farmer's intentional act. By using the words let, the farmer lets his bull, right, into a neighboring fence paddock, right? So the bull is an agent of the farmer's intent, right? What if the bull broke down the fence at a weak spot the farmer wasn't aware of? There's no intent there. The farmer didn't let the bull into the next bit of land. The farmer just broke down the fence because he smelled, right, a cow in heat and he wanted to cover her, right? So that happens, right? So, but in any case, there would be no intent, right? And intent is a key legal concept called mens rea, the state of the mind, right? So a key concept, intent, legal codes that must be proved. I need to prove that you're intending to commit the crime, right? And for example, that's the difference, one difference between murder and manslaughter. If you intended to do it, murder. If you didn't intend to do it, manslaughter, right? Just, we need to understand that key difference. Intent is important. Right? Furthermore, it assumes that the bull-owning farmer will make a property claim against the farmer whose cow was impregnated, claiming that because claiming the offspring is his because the bull provided the pollen. I mean, the bull provided the semen. Is that argument probable? Will a farmer whose bull broke into a neighboring farm, impregnated a cow, right? Is he going to assert property rights over the calf? No. I don't understand how that works, right? I don't understand how that works. But do you think it's plausible? Is it legally defensible? Go into the comments. Let me know. I am really, really curious to know. So in conclusion, and this is, I believe, one of the last things I'm going to take from this transcript, patented genetic, again, seek, I didn't make any changes, should follow the same rule. If you own the gene, you own the fence. This needs clear regulatory language because it's just going to keep on coming up. I got to say this again. I'll go here. Clear regulatory language? In what universe? Kilpatrick, do you think that countries will get together and develop a clear policy on this, right? So there is a moratorium about using GERTs right now. One reason why there's a moratorium is because they haven't been able to come up with defensible consensus language, right? And they're just saying the answer is no until we figure it out, right? You're claiming, so what? How do you propose getting every nation on earth to agree to clear regulatory language? And even if a widespread consensus were achieved, do you really think the current US administration would sign on to it if the billionaire donor class objected to it? Right? So if the people who own millions of shares in Mars, right, wanted to say, I'm sorry, we're not signing on to this, right? Would it happen? No, they'd go to the Department of Agriculture, they'd go to the Federal Trade Commission, they'd go to the people who've been, quote unquote, negotiating tariffs, right? And they would make sure that they would put whatever roadblock they could to make sure that consensus language was not developed. And I got to remember that this the current U.S. administration withdrew from the Paris Agreement, right? Which is the international treaty adopted in 2015 to combat climate change. I mean, as of January 2026, 194 countries are parties to the agreement. The U.S. is the main exception, right? Do you really think that the administration that pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, right, is going to sign on to this? In what universe is that going to happen? Right? And if the United States led the gene editing regulation effort, would anyone trust the current administration's intentions or believe that there was more than a transient transactional commitment to the regulations? We have no history that says that a quote unquote promise made by this administration, right, other than to reduce taxes for people who don't need their taxes reduced, right, in pursuit of something that they call trickle down economics, which I rename tinkle down because the people above you are pissing on you, right? And it's yellow, so it must be gold, right? So it's not trickle down economics, tinkle down economics is the way I think about it, right? All right. Or did anybody believe that it would be anything other than a transactional, right, negotiation or transactional commitment, or that it wouldn't favor pun intended, favor global corporations in consuming countries, right? Would it favor Mars, which is headquartered in the US, Mondelez, which is headquartered in the US, Hershey, which is headquartered in the US, and these are 3 of the top 10 largest candy companies in the world, confectionery companies in the world. They do other things besides chocolate stuff, but 3 of the 10, there may be another one, but 3 of the 10 are in the US. 2 of them are in the Chicago area. I don't know how that works, right? Or if whatever it is that we were doing, right, the US is doing, wouldn't favor global corporations in consuming countries. And I like consuming and producing as opposed to global north, global south, developed to developing. It's an important linguistic distinction in my mind. But would anybody believe why we were doing it? Would anybody trust why we were doing it? Or in 5 years, we change our mind? And in this particular case, what would happen if there is a Democratic administration elected in 2028, which controlled both the House and the Senate, right? What's going to be the whiplash there? I hope that there is, for many, many reasons. But where would, we've already proven that that the U.S. administration can't be trusted. The current U.S. administration can't be trusted. So, Layne, right? Mr. Kilpatrick, hey, listen, if you want to come on an episode in the future and talk with me about it, happy to do so. Again, as long as it's live and it's streamed not only to my channels, but it also is streamed to at least your YouTube channel, live, unedited, so that people can see it, right? So it's easy to propose solutions, Layne, right, that are for all practical purposes unattainable for technical and political reasons, right? You haven't proved your solution. You've just asserted that you have the solution, you know what the solution is, without providing any evidence that it is possible. And I've shown a couple of reasons why it's not a fertile idea. You can't plant it in the ground, right, and have reasonable people, right? And maybe that's the point. He can plant it in the minds of people who don't know anything, and they'll go, yeah, right? We got to get these big companies and get them to do this because the technology is this. They're just ignoring us, and they're trying to fool us, and they're trying to take over all the cocoa, right? I'm sorry, right? That doesn't work, right? So he says a multinational patent company patents something. Whoops. Let me go back here because I'm over that rant. A multinational company patents something, lets it reproduce uncontrollably. Lets it reproduce uncontrollably? What do you mean? Once you put a plant in the ground, you can't control where it reproduces, right? Uncontrollably. You put a plant, it pollinates. You can't control where the pollen goes. You might be able to regulate what happens to a plant that receives the pollen from this gene-edited pollen donor, but you're again, reproduce uncontrollably. Coded language. It's a dog whistle, right? A multinational company patents something, lets it reproduce uncontrollably, and then sues the farmer it spreads to. Call that what you want. I call it legalized theft. So this is Kilpatrick's point. He thinks that big companies, Mars Incorporated, right, is a big bully. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to seize the trees and the land of cocoa farmers. And he calls it legalized theft without actually addressing the systemic institutional barriers to that happening. The first one of which is Mars doesn't want to own the farms. And he doesn't understand that. There's not enough profit in it for Mars, right, to get involved in it. Right. And the pushback would be, I hope I'm starting the pushback against this idea. Right. But he hasn't addressed all of it. He's asserted it. Right. And I call that argument, the one that he talks here, a load of bollocks. And that's the technical term. Right. And I think you should, right, take a look at this and come to the same conclusion. I'm hoping that you will look at this and come to the same conclusion that I do, that this argument is a load of bollocks, right? And here's where it is. Mars is knowingly and deliberately letting it reproduce uncontrollably with the intent of suing the farmers who do not and cannot prevent it from happening, right? That's not legalized theft. It's not only not legalized theft, it's a paranoid straw man. He's erecting an argument, right, that has no substance behind it and knocking it down and claiming victory, when I would argue that what he set up, right, is not, right, something that any of us needs to worry about. So Kilpatrick is ranting against globalism using conspiracy theories cloaked in science denialism, bathed in ignorance, his own ignorance and the ignorance of the people who follow him. He's counting on his followers' relative ignorance, the fact that they know less than he does, right? And the fact that they will not do any real research, right? But they will be confident in their belief that they could do their own research. And by research, I mean using ChatGPT like it were Google, right? If they wanted to. Well, if I wanted to fact check it, I could, right? I could do my own research. It's the favorite line of flat earthers. You can do your own research, right? Right? I'm sorry, it's another rant. We don't need to go into here. So Kilpatrick does not supply a single shred of supporting evidence for any of his assertions in the transcript or in notes to the posts. He just asserts them. Again, calling on Hitchens' razor, anything which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, right? And that should be your default position. If somebody makes an assertion for which there is no evidence, and a search for the evidence does not corroborate their position, you're not required to debunk what they're doing. You're not required to provide evidence against them. You're not required to. But that is exactly what it is that I'm doing here, right? I want to give you a deconstruction on almost a sentence by sentence basis of the entire argument that is laid out, right, with refutations for every single one of the points. And I showed you where he's basically true in many, many cases. I showed you where he's basically true, right? And then I've said, here are some leaps of quote unquote logic. Here are some leaps of thinking that I find just too great to follow on. But it is not your job, it's not our job to provide evidence to disprove his assertions without evidence. But that exactly what Kilpatrick asked every critical, skeptical watcher to do. He's saying, prove me wrong. Prove me wrong. And this is where Brandolini's law comes into effect. You can make the assertion, but it takes a long, long time. You can make the assertion in under 2 minutes, but it takes a lot more time to deconstruct what it is you're doing, right? In a way, provide the evidence, provide the bona fides, provide, right, the structure to be able to go and debunk what you're saying. It's just a lot harder. Whereas people who don't use those kinds of critical thinking skills will believe what it is that you have to say, because they can go to Chat GPT and it'll say, yeah, it's largely true, right? So this is the end. How did I do, right? Did I provide enough counterfactual evidence to persuade you, right, that I debunked Kilpatrick's claims sufficiently, right? So please let me know in the comments, live stream, on the Chocolate Life, if you remember, please do those things, right? Let me know how I did. And what I'm hoping you'll be able to do, right, is to use the same ideas, the same sort of logic, the same sort of approach, methodological skepticism, right, as contrasted with the principle of charity, right, to be able to become a better consumer of what you find online, and in the quote unquote some news outlets. It's really, really important if what it is that we want to do is we want to be able to understand the world that we live in, and what it is that we're going to be doing in the future. What kind of world are we going to be in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years is really, really important. And with that, that's the end of this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. If you are not a member, you can click on the join button. Always a free membership, but if you do have the financial resources to support what we're doing, they start at as little as $5 a month or $42 a year, and yearly subscriptions, memberships, come with coaching and consulting hours that you can ask me anything, but it's a one-on-one. It can be about business, it can be about cocoa. As long as it's about chocolate or cacao, I'm happy to answer all your questions. Recipes, sourcing, all sorts of things, you can engage with me. But if you really like what it is that I'm doing and sort of these deep dive, almost feature length debunks, then becoming a lifetime member, which is here, the 25th anniversary lifetime membership special offer. You can go to this post and you can become a lifetime member of the Chocolate Life, for which I will be eternally grateful for my lifetime. Right, eternally grateful. And you can find a list of all the member perks on this post. And with that, I want to say thank you for everybody who watched this to the end. Right, again, please go and comment. Let me know how I did. If you've got a question, something you might want to push back against, I'm completely open to all of that stuff. I want you to push back against me. I want you to push back against me. I don't want you necessarily to take me at my word. Fact check me. If I made a mistake, let me know. If you think I made a mistake, if there's something that I wasn't clear about, let me know. I will try to clear it up. And with that, it's Friday. It is the last Friday in May, right? And I just want to wish everybody a fabulous weekend, and to remember that if you're working with chocolate, and you're not having fun, and this kind of stuff, I have fun doing this kind of stuff. But if you're working with chocolate and you are not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.